There are sounds you learn to ignore in the wilderness. Branches snapping in the distance. Rocks shifting beneath snow. Owls calling from somewhere you can't see. Even footsteps can become meaningless after enough nights alone, because the forest has a way of making ordinary sounds feel personal. But there is one sound I have never learned to ignore. Children laughing. Especially when there are no children around. The first time I heard them at Mirror Lake, it was 12 minutes after midnight. I remember the exact time because I was sitting inside my tent with my watch in my hand, trying to convince myself that the sound had come from somewhere else. Maybe a campsite farther down the trail. Maybe tourists who had ignored the closure signs. Maybe some group of teenagers playing a stupid prank. That was what I told myself. Then I heard the laughter again. Closer. 3 children, maybe 4. One boy laughing hard enough to cough. A little girl giggling behind him. And another voice that sounded so young I couldn't place its age. They were laughing the way children laugh when they're trying not to be heard. Then one of them whispered something. I couldn't make out the words. So I unzipped my tent and looked toward the lake. There was no one there. Only the moon reflected on the black water. Only the trees. Only the mountains surrounding me like walls. Then the children laughed again. This time, they were behind me. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't know it then, but the laughter wasn't the strangest thing about Mirror Lake. The strangest thing was that the children never appeared in the forest. They only appeared in reflections. My name is Daniel Mercer. I am 38 years old, and for most of my adult life I worked around wilderness areas. Not as a park ranger. Not as law enforcement. And not as some kind of government investigator. I was a field ecologist. My work was mostly ordinary. Water sampling. Wildlife surveys. Vegetation mapping. Trail impact studies. The kind of work nobody makes movies about. I liked it that way. Nature had always made sense to me because nature didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. A bear was a bear. A storm was a storm. A river was a river. If you spent enough time watching something, you eventually understood its patterns. That belief lasted until the summer I spent around Mirror Lake. The assignment itself wasn't unusual. A small research team had been studying changes in the eastern Yosemite watershed, particularly around areas that experienced heavy seasonal traffic. Mirror Lake was one of those places. It was beautiful in a way that almost felt artificial. Granite walls rising impossibly high on either side. Dark pine forests. Cold mountain air. The Merced River moving somewhere beyond the trees. And the lake itself, depending on the season and the weather, becoming almost perfectly reflective. That's how it got its name. The surface could become so still that the boundary between water and sky disappeared. Mountains appeared upside down. Trees seemed to grow downward into another forest. Clouds floated beneath your feet. If you stared at it long enough, your brain began making mistakes. That was something our supervisor warned us about. He called it perceptual fatigue. Too much time in visually repetitive environments could cause your brain to fill in information that wasn't there. Humans are pattern recognition machines. We hate uncertainty. So when we see darkness moving between trees, we don't see darkness. We see something. When we hear a sound we can't identify, our brain starts searching for an explanation. And when it can't find one, it invents one. That was the scientific explanation. I believed it. I believed it completely. Until the first night. We had planned to camp several miles from the main tourist areas while collecting water samples over several days. There were 3 of us. Me. A woman named Rachel. And an older field technician named Owen. Owen had spent more time in Yosemite than either of us. He knew the trails without checking maps. He could identify birds from a single note. He knew where storms came down from the high country, and which slopes became dangerous after dark. The first evening, while we were preparing dinner, I noticed he kept looking toward the lake. Not at it. Past it. Toward the trees. I asked him what he was watching. He shook his head. Nothing. You've been staring over there for 5 minutes. I know. Then what's over there? He looked at me. For a moment, he seemed genuinely uncomfortable. Then he said something I assumed was a joke. Don't camp near the lake. I laughed. Why? He didn't. Seriously. Rachel looked over. Why? Owen lowered his voice. Because of the children. I remember laughing again. Not because it was funny. Because I didn't know what else to do. Owen didn't smile. There aren't any children out here after dark, he said. Okay. So if you hear them. He stopped. What? He looked toward the lake again. Don't answer. That was all he said. Rachel and I exchanged a glance. Later that night, she told me Owen had a habit of exaggerating old wilderness stories. I agreed. I didn't think about it again. Until midnight. The first laugh came from across the lake. It was faint. Almost carried by the wind. Then it happened again. A child's laugh. I sat up inside my sleeping bag. For several seconds I didn't move. I could hear Rachel breathing in the tent beside mine. Owen was sleeping farther away. Then came another laugh. I unzipped my tent slightly. Moonlight spilled through the opening. The lake was visible between the trees. Perfectly still. I saw nothing. Then I heard footsteps. Small footsteps. Running across wet ground. They came from the opposite shore. 1, 2, 3. Then laughter. I stepped outside. The cold hit me immediately. I could smell pine and damp granite. My flashlight swept across the shoreline. Nothing. I called out. Hello? The laughter stopped. That silence was worse. The forest suddenly seemed enormous. I could hear the water. My own breathing. The faint movement of branches overhead. Then a little girl's voice came from somewhere near the lake. He's awake. I froze. I didn't answer. The voice was soft. Almost conversational. Then another child whispered. Don't let him see us. I turned toward the lake. My flashlight caught the water. And for 1 second, I saw something. 3 small figures standing near the opposite shore. They were only visible in the reflection. Not above the water. In it. 3 dark silhouettes. Standing shoulder to shoulder. I raised my flashlight. The actual shoreline was empty. I looked back at the water. They were still there. 3 children. Their reflections were facing me. But there was nothing above them. I dropped the flashlight. It hit the ground. The beams swung wildly through the trees. When I looked at the lake again, the reflections were gone. I ran back to my tent. I didn't wake Rachel. I didn't wake Owen. I just sat there until morning. At sunrise, I convinced myself I had experienced a combination of exhaustion, moonlight, and expectation. It sounded reasonable. It had to be. When I told Owen what I'd heard, he didn't look surprised. He just packed his equipment. Did you answer? No. Did you look directly at them? I saw them. He stopped. Not directly. What does that mean? He stared at me. You got lucky. I asked him what he meant. He didn't answer. Rachel finally interrupted. Okay. Enough. She sounded irritated. We're not doing this. Owen looked at her. Then he looked at me. Stay away from the water after dark. That was the last thing he said about it. For the next 2 days, nothing happened. And that was almost worse. Because I started doubting myself. We worked during daylight. Collected samples. Recorded measurements. Mapped vegetation. Everything looked normal. The forest was beautiful. Birds moved through the canopy. Deer appeared occasionally between the trees. The lake reflected the granite walls. No children. No voices. No strange figures. Nothing. By the 3rd evening, I felt embarrassed. I even joked with Rachel about it. I think Yosemite has finally broken my brain. She smiled. Welcome to field research. Owen didn't laugh. That night, he refused to camp near the lake. He moved our camp almost half a mile uphill. We asked why. He said he preferred higher ground. Nobody argued. Around 11:40, we heard something. A sound in the distance. It was faint. Almost impossible to recognize. Then Rachel sat up. Is that? I heard it too. Children laughing. Not one child. Several. The laughter drifted through the trees. It sounded impossibly far away. Then impossibly close. Rachel whispered my name. I looked at Owen. His face had gone pale. The laughter stopped. A few seconds passed. Then we heard footsteps. Running. Closer. Something moved between the trees. I grabbed my flashlight. Owen caught my wrist. Don't. What? Don't shine it. Why? He didn't answer. The footsteps came closer. Then stopped. Right outside the camp. I could hear someone breathing. A child. Small. Fast. Terrified. Rachel began crying silently. Nobody moved. Then a little boy spoke from somewhere beyond the darkness. Are you Daniel? Every muscle in my body locked. I had never heard that voice before. How do you know my name? Owen whispered. Don't answer. The boy laughed. Then he said something that made my stomach turn. You already told us. The forest went silent. The footsteps moved away. We waited. 10 minutes. 20. Nothing. Finally, Owen stood. He looked older than he had that morning. We leave at first light. Rachel asked why. He said. Because this isn't the first time. None of us slept. At dawn, Owen finally told us what he knew. Years earlier, he had worked with another field team near Mirror Lake. They had lost a member. A young researcher named Michael. He disappeared during a storm. There was no body. No equipment. No footprints leading away. Nothing. The strange part was that Michael had left a notebook behind. Most of it contained ordinary field observations. But the final pages were different. Owen had read them. Michael had written about hearing children laughing near the lake. He had written about seeing people in reflections. He had written one sentence repeatedly. I can hear them remembering me. I asked Owen what that meant. He said he didn't know. Then he told me something else. Michael had a younger sister. She had died when she was 6. Owen didn't know the details. But Michael had mentioned her during the expedition. He had been dreaming about her. That information changed the way I thought about the whole thing. Because perhaps this wasn't a place filled with ghosts. Perhaps it was a place that learned what people were afraid of. A place that took something already inside your mind and reflected it back at you. The idea sounded ridiculous. Until I found my own notebook. I had left it beside my sleeping bag. A page was open. I knew I hadn't opened it. At the top was a sentence written in my handwriting. I miss Dad. I stared at it. My father had been dead for 11 years. I hadn't written those words. But they were written in my handwriting. Rachel looked over my shoulder. What is that? I closed the notebook. Nothing. She knew I was lying. She didn't press. That afternoon, we started hiking out. The trail should have taken us several hours. It took almost an entire day. Not because we got lost. Because the trail kept changing. A fallen tree appeared where there hadn't been one. A bend seemed longer than before. A trail marker pointed in a direction none of us remembered. Then we found something that shouldn't have existed. A wooden sign. Old. Weathered. Half buried in moss. It had one word carved into it. Mirror. There was an arrow pointing toward the lake. Owen stared at it. That's not here. What? This trail doesn't exist. Rachel laughed nervously. Maybe an old trail. No. He walked around the sign. There was never a trail here. I looked beyond it. There was a narrow path through the trees. It descended toward the water. We should have walked away. Instead, I followed it. I don't know why. Curiosity is one of the most dangerous instincts humans possess. Sometimes it disguises itself as courage. Sometimes it feels like responsibility. And sometimes you follow something simply because you're terrified of what might happen if you don't. The trail led to the lake? Not the lake we knew. Another version of it. The water was perfectly still. The mountains looked different. The sky was darker. There was no wind. No birds. No insects. Then I saw the children. They were standing on the opposite shore. This time, I could see them. 3 children. A boy. 2 girls. They wore old-fashioned clothes. The boy held a small wooden boat. One girl had dark hair. The other had blonde hair. None of them moved. Rachel whispered, "Who are they?" Owen didn't answer. The children began walking toward us. Across the water. Not swimming. Walking. Their feet disappeared beneath the surface. Their bodies remained above it. I couldn't breathe. The boy stopped in the middle of the lake. He looked directly at me. Then he smiled. And I realized something. He looked exactly like me. Not as I am now. As I had looked when I was 7 years old. The same dark hair. The same crooked front tooth. The same expression. The same scar above my eyebrow. I stumbled backward. Rachel grabbed me. "Daniel?" I couldn't answer. The boy across the lake raised his hand. And said, "You forgot." Then the lake changed. For 1 second, the surface became completely black. Not dark. Black. Like there was no water there at all. I saw dozens of faces beneath it. Adults. Children. Old people. People staring upward. Some were crying. Some were smiling. Some looked peaceful. And some looked exactly like people I knew. My father. My mother. Rachel. Owen. Me. Then the reflection of my father looked up. He moved his mouth. I couldn't hear him. But I knew what he said. "You left me there." Everything disappeared. I woke up on the forest floor. It was night. Rachel was beside me. Owen was gone. For several seconds, I didn't know where I was. Then I remembered the lake. I stood. "Where's Owen?" Rachel stared at me. "He never came with us." "What?" She looked confused. "You and I left the campsite together." "No." "Yes. I remember all 3 of us. There were only 2. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She showed me the photographs from her camera. There were pictures from the previous days. 3 tents. 3 people. Then the last photograph. 2 people. Me. Rachel. No Owen. I felt something cold move through my chest. We checked the trail. We found no sign of him. No footprints. No equipment. No clothing. Nothing. The next morning, we reached the main trail. Everything looked normal. Tourists. Noise. Vehicles. The ordinary world. I thought it was over. It wasn't. 3 weeks later, I received an envelope at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed Mirror Lake. Taken at night. 3 children stood near the water. Behind them was a man. Owen. He was looking directly at the camera. On the back of the photograph was a sentence. "You left him there." I burned the photograph. At least I thought I did. Months passed. Then years. I stopped working in the wilderness. I moved closer to the city. I told myself I had recovered. I told myself what happened had been a stress response. Sleep deprivation. Fear. Suggestion. A shared hallucination. Anything was better than accepting the alternative. Then, last winter, I found my old field notebook. I hadn't seen it in years. It was sitting on my desk. I don't know how it got there. The pages were filled with notes I remembered writing. Weather conditions. Water levels. Animal sightings. Coordinates. Then I reached the final page. There was a drawing. A crude drawing of 3 children standing beside a lake. Underneath it, written in my handwriting, "They don't want us to leave." I stared at it for a long time. Then I noticed something. There were 4 children in the drawing. Not 3. 4. The 4th one was standing behind the others. It was a boy. A little boy with dark hair. A crooked front tooth. A scar above his eyebrow. Me. I closed the notebook. I haven't returned to Yosemite since. I don't intend to. But sometimes, late at night, I hear children laughing outside my apartment. The first time it happened, I ignored them. The second time, I checked the window. The third time, I looked at the glass. And there they were. 3 small reflections standing behind me. I didn't turn around. I knew better. I simply closed my eyes. The children started laughing. Then one of them whispered, "Daniel." I stayed silent. Another voice said, "You're still remembering." And then came the voice I feared most. My own. A child's voice. Soft. Excited. Almost happy. It said, "Come back." I haven't slept properly since. Because I've finally understood something about Mirror Lake. It doesn't contain ghosts. At least I don't think it does. It doesn't resurrect the dead. It doesn't create monsters. It doesn't even seem interested in hurting people. That's what makes it worse. I think the lake reflects something much more ordinary. Something human. Regret. Grief. Loneliness. The parts of ourselves we bury because they're too painful to carry. Maybe that's why the children laugh. Children don't understand the things adults spend their lives hiding. They don't understand shame. They don't understand guilt. They don't understand why someone would rather forget than remember. And maybe the lake doesn't show us what is beneath the water. Maybe it shows us what is beneath ourselves. The faces I saw weren't ghosts. They were memories. The people I thought I recognized weren't trapped in the lake. They were trapped inside me. And perhaps that was the real reason Owen disappeared. Maybe he didn't vanish because something took him. Maybe the lake simply showed him something he couldn't bear to leave behind. Something he had spent years pretending wasn't there. I still don't know what happened to him. I still don't know whether the children were real. I still don't know why my childhood appeared on the other side of the lake. And I don't know why, every few months, I find fresh dirt beneath my fingernails when I wake up. But there is one thing I know. There are places in the wilderness where the silence feels different. Places where the trees seem to listen. Places where water becomes so still that your reflection looks less like you and more like someone pretending to be you. If you ever find yourself near one of those places after midnight, don't assume the sounds you hear are coming from the forest. Sometimes they're coming from memory. And if you hear children laughing somewhere you know they shouldn't be, don't answer. Don't call out. Don't walk toward them. And whatever you do, don't look into the water. Because the most frightening thing you might see there isn't a monster. It might be someone you loved. Someone you lost. Someone you thought you had forgotten. Or, if you're very unlucky, yourself. The version of you that never left. The version of you that is still standing somewhere in the darkness, waiting patiently for you to remember the way home. Because I finally understand what the children meant when they told me I had forgotten. They weren't asking me to remember them. They were asking me to remember myself. And that is the part of this story I wish I could forget. Because every night, when the world becomes quiet, I can still hear them. 3 children laughing somewhere beyond my window. And sometimes, there is a 4th voice. Mine. Laughing with them. For a long time, I believed the laughter was the worst part. I was wrong. The worst part was when it stopped. Because silence gave me room to think. And once I started thinking about what had happened at Mirror Lake, I began noticing things I had spent years deliberately ignoring. The first was my memory. I had always considered myself someone with a good memory. I remembered dates, names, places, small details from fieldwork that other people forgot. But after Mirror Lake, certain parts of my childhood became strangely difficult to access. Not forgotten. Blocked. There is a difference. For example, I could remember my father teaching me how to tie a fishing knot. I could remember the smell of his jacket. I could remember his hands. But I couldn't remember where we had been. Every time I tried, my mind produced the same image. Water. Black water beneath a gray sky. I had assumed it was a lake near our old home. Then one night, I found an old photograph. It was tucked inside a box in my mother's attic. I had been helping her clean after she decided to move. The photograph was small and faded. My father was standing beside me. I was 7. And behind us was a lake. I stared at it for nearly a minute. My mother noticed. "What is it?" I turned the photograph over. There was writing on the back. Yosemite. October 1995. I laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because the alternative was admitting that my entire understanding of my childhood was wrong. My mother had never told me we'd been to Yosemite. I asked her about it. She went completely still. "What did you find?" I showed her the photograph. She took it from my hand. Her face changed. I had never seen that expression on her before. Not fear exactly. Recognition. She sat down. "Where did you get this?" "Your attic." She stared at the photograph. Then she said, "You weren't supposed to have that." I asked what she meant. She didn't answer. I asked again. She finally looked at me. "Your father took you there once." "When?" "Before he died." "I was 7. She nodded. "Why don't I remember?" My mother looked toward the window. Then she said something that stayed with me. "Because we wanted you to forget." I felt my stomach tighten. "What happened?" She shook her head. "Nothing happened, Mom. Nothing that we could explain." She put the photograph face down. Then she told me the story. My father had taken me camping in Yosemite after a difficult period in our family. I apparently hadn't wanted to go. He convinced me. We stayed near a lake. My mother couldn't remember which one. But on the second night, I disappeared from the campsite. For almost 3 hours. My father found me standing beside the water. Alone. Barefoot. He said I was talking to someone. A little girl. My mother said my father had asked me who she was. I told him. "She's waiting for her brother." My father carried me back. The next morning, we left. That should have been the end. But on the drive home, I apparently began describing things I couldn't have known. I told my parents there were children underneath the water. I told them one of them was angry. And I kept asking my father why he had left someone behind. My father had no idea what I meant. But 3 weeks later, he returned to Yosemite alone. He never told my mother why. He never came home. I had always believed my father died in a highway accident. That's what I'd been told. That's what I remembered. My mother finally admitted the truth. He disappeared. His vehicle was found abandoned. No body. No accident. No explanation. I stared at her. "Why did you tell me he died?" She started crying. "Because you were 7. That's not an answer. It was the only answer I had." "What happened to him?" She shook her head. "I don't know." Then she looked at me. "But I know where he went." I already knew. I didn't want to say it. She did. Yosemite. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the lake. The children. My father. The photograph. And the sentence written on the back. Yosemite. October 1995. I searched through old maps. I found the area where my father had camped. Mirror Lake. The date was wrong by only 3 days from the date I had been there. 20 years apart. Same month. Same lake. Same children. At least, that's what I believed. I convinced myself there had to be another explanation. There always was. Until I found my father's notebook. It was in the bottom of a box my mother had hidden behind old clothes. The cover was damaged. The first half contained ordinary notes: weather, trail conditions, fishing locations. Then the handwriting changed. The sentences became shorter, more frantic. The final pages were filled with observations. Children heard near lake after midnight. No footprints. Voices appear closer when eyes are closed. Reflections don't always match movement. Never answer when they say your name. I stopped reading. My hands were shaking. Then I reached the final page. There was only one sentence. I think the lake remembers everyone who has looked into it. Below that was another line. I think it remembers them better than we do. I closed the notebook. For the first time in 28 years, I understood why my mother wanted me to forget. She wasn't protecting me from a ghost. She was protecting me from a memory. The next morning, I called Rachel. I hadn't spoken to her in years. She answered on the fourth ring. Daniel? Her voice sounded tired. How did you know it was me? There was silence. Then she said, Because I saw you last night. I stopped breathing. What? At the lake? I sat down. What lake? She didn't answer. I knew. Mirror Lake. She said. I thought you were dead. I couldn't speak. Daniel, I need you to listen to me. Where are you? California. Why? Another silence. Because I went back. My hands became cold. When? 3 months ago. Why didn't you tell me? Because I thought I was imagining things. I asked her what she saw. She told me she had returned to Mirror Lake because she couldn't stop thinking about Owen. She wanted closure. She found something instead. An old campsite. Not ours. Older. Almost completely swallowed by vegetation. There was a rusted metal box beneath a fallen tree. Inside was a collection of notebooks. Field journals. Photographs. Names. Dates. Dozens of them. All connected to the lake. She had photographed some pages. Then she said, There's something you need to see. She sent me a picture. It showed a page covered in handwriting. At the top was a date. October 1957. Below it was a list of names. 8 adults. 6 children. Then a note. All 14 heard the children laughing. Only 3 returned. I stared at the photograph. Rachel sent another. October 1931. 7 adults. 4 children. 2 returned. Then another. June 1904. 9 people. 5 children. 1 returned. The pattern continued. Different years. Different groups. Different names. Same lake. Same phenomenon. Then Rachel sent the final photograph. It was a page dated 1995. There were 3 names. Daniel Mercer. Thomas Mercer. And 1 other name. I didn't recognize it. I called Rachel immediately. What is the third name? She didn't answer. Rachel. I don't know. You photographed the page. I know. Who is she? I don't know. The name was Elizabeth Mercer. My father's sister. My aunt. I had never known I had an aunt. My mother had never mentioned her. I searched family records. Nothing. No birth certificate. No school records. No photographs. It was as though she had never existed. Except for one thing. My father's notebook mentioned her. He wrote, Elizabeth says the children aren't dead. They are waiting. I couldn't stop thinking about that sentence. The children aren't dead. They are waiting. Waiting for what? Waiting for whom? And why did they keep appearing to people who had already lost someone? I began researching Mirror Lake from home. Not internet conspiracy forums. Actual historical archives. Old park records. Newspaper articles. Personal journals. Anything I could find. The deeper I went, the stranger it became. There were scattered reports going back more than a century. Nothing supernatural. Nothing explicit. Just disappearances. Missing hikers. Unexplained accidents. People becoming disoriented. People claiming they heard voices. Most reports were dismissed. Cold exposure. Altitude sickness. Exhaustion. Grief. Alcohol. Every explanation was reasonable. Individually. But together, they formed a pattern. And every few decades, someone described children laughing near the water. I found one report from 1898. A man named Samuel Carter claimed that he saw his dead daughter standing on the opposite side of the lake. He walked into the water toward her. They found his clothes folded neatly on the shore. No body. Another report from 1942. A woman heard her deceased husband calling her from the lake. She disappeared before sunrise. And another from 1976. A group of hikers heard children playing. One member followed the sound. He returned 6 hours later. He couldn't remember where he'd been. He kept asking, "Why did I leave them?" That phrase appeared in several accounts. Why did I leave them? I started to understand. The lake didn't create a fear. It found one. It took whatever regret you carried deepest inside you and gave it a voice. A face. A memory. A shape. It didn't need to kill you. You would do the rest yourself. You would walk toward whatever you had spent your life wishing you could see again. That was the horror. Not that something wanted you. That you might want it more. I called Rachel again. "We need to go back." She said no. I told her about my father. She went quiet. Then she said, "Daniel, that's exactly what it wants." "What?" "For you to go back." "You don't know that." "I do." "How?" "Because I already went." She paused. "And I saw Owen." My throat tightened. "Where?" "In the water." "What did he say?" She didn't answer immediately. Then, "He asked me why I left him." I closed my eyes. "Did you answer?" "No." "Good." "Daniel." "What?" "He wasn't alone." I waited. "There were 4 children." I remembered my drawing. 4. Rachel continued. "And one of them looked like you." I didn't speak. Then she said, "The other 3 were holding hands." "Who was the 4th?" "You." "That's impossible." "I know." "Then why are we talking about it?" "Because I took a photograph." She sent it. I opened it. The image was almost completely black. The lake occupied most of the frame. At first I saw nothing. Then my eyes adjusted. There were 4 small figures near the opposite shore. 3 children. And 1 adult. Me. Standing among them. I dropped my phone. I didn't touch it for several minutes. Then it rang. "Rachel." I answered. She was crying. "Daniel." "What?" "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If you hear your father's voice." I waited. "Don't follow it." I promised. 3 nights later I heard him. I was lying in bed when someone knocked on my apartment door. 3 slow knocks. I checked the clock. 12:03. I didn't move. Another knock. Then his voice. My father's voice. "Daniel." I stopped breathing. "Open the door." I knew it wasn't him. I knew. But every cell in my body recognized that voice. The same voice that had told me bedtime stories. The same voice that had taught me to fish. The same voice I had forgotten. "Daniel." I stood. My hand reached for the door. Then I remembered what Rachel said. "Don't follow it." I stepped backward. The voice changed. It became younger. A child's voice. My own. "Please." I closed my eyes. Then came the laughter. 3 children. Right outside my apartment. The doorknob began turning. I backed away. The door opened. There was nobody in the hallway. Only darkness. And on the floor outside my apartment was a small wooden boat. I recognized it immediately. It was the boat from the lake. The same one the little boy had been holding. There was something inside it. A photograph. I picked it up. It showed my father. He was standing beside Mirror Lake. But he wasn't alone. A little girl stood next to him. Elizabeth. My aunt. And beside her was another child. Me. Except the photograph was dated 1976. I dropped it. That was when I finally understood. The lake didn't exist in time the way we did. It wasn't showing me the past. It wasn't showing me the future. It was showing me possibilities. Lives that could have existed. People who might have existed. Versions of ourselves created from memories and regrets. The children weren't dead. They were possibilities. Forgotten versions of people. Lives abandoned when reality chose another path. Maybe that's why they laughed. They were children who had never grown up. They existed only in the moments people wondered. What if? What if I had stayed? What if I had gone back? What if I had answered? What if I had saved them? What if I had never left? The lake was a place where those questions became visible. And once you saw them, you wanted them. I called Rachel. She didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. I knew where she was. Before I could stop myself, I was packing a bag. I drove west before sunrise. I told myself I was going to find Rachel. That was a lie. I was going because I wanted to see my father. Even knowing what the lake did. Even knowing the danger. Some part of me wanted to believe the child across the water was real. That my father was still there. That all those years of grief had been a misunderstanding. That maybe I could bring him home. That's the most dangerous thing about hope. Sometimes hope doesn't save you. Sometimes hope is the thing that walks you into the darkness. I reached Yosemite just before sunset. The mountains were covered in snow. The air was bitter. The trail toward Mirror Lake was almost empty. I walked alone. Every step felt familiar. Too familiar. Then I saw something hanging from a tree. A yellow jacket. Owen's jacket. It was covered in frost. I touched it. The fabric was warm. I pulled my hand away. Behind me, a child laughed. I turned. Nothing. Another laugh. Closer. Then my father's voice. Daniel! I looked toward the lake. He was standing across the water. Exactly as I remembered him. Same jacket. Same face. Same tired smile. He raised one hand. I wanted to run toward him. Instead, I remembered the notebook. I remembered the children. I remembered every person who had walked into that water because they wanted something badly enough to stop being afraid. My father smiled. You came back, I whispered. You're not real. His smile disappeared. For the first time, I saw sadness in his face. I know. The lake behind him began to ripple. Something moved beneath the surface. Dozens of faces appeared. And among them was Rachel. She was screaming. I stepped toward the water. My father shook his head. No. Where is she? You can't bring her back. Why? Because she isn't there. What does that mean? He looked behind me. Then I heard Rachel's voice. Not from the lake. From the forest. Daniel! I turned. She was standing between the trees. Alive. Terrified. And behind her stood Owen. Then my father. Then Elizabeth. Then dozens of other people. All watching me. All waiting. My father whispered, Don't choose us. The children began laughing. The lake went completely still. And suddenly I understood what Mirror Lake had been doing all along. It wasn't trapping people. It was testing them. Every person who came there was given a choice. Stay with what you lost. Or return to what remained. Most people chose the past. Because the past is seductive. It doesn't ask you to change. It only asks you to forget what it cost. I looked at my father. For the first time, I understood why he had disappeared. He had seen Elizabeth. He had seen me. He had seen the family he wished he could have saved. And he chose them. But my father had left me something. A warning. Not in his final words. In his notebook. I think the lake remembers everyone who has looked into it. But perhaps he had written the wrong thing. Maybe the lake didn't remember people. Maybe people remembered the lake. Maybe once you looked into it, some part of you stayed behind. And that was why I could still hear the children. Why I could still see reflections. Why I had spent years feeling that something was missing from my own memories. Part of me had never left. It had been waiting there. I stepped backward. My father looked at me. Daniel. I shook my head. I'm sorry. He smiled. I know. Then the forest behind him disappeared. The children disappeared. Elizabeth disappeared. Owen disappeared. The lake became ordinary. Just water. Just mountains. Just darkness. Rachel grabbed my arm. Run! We ran. Neither of us looked back. We didn't stop until we reached the trailhead. Neither of us spoke. At sunrise, Rachel finally asked, Did you see him? I nodded. Was it really him? I thought about the question. Then I said, No. She looked relieved. Good. I stared toward the mountains. It was the part of me that still wanted him to be. Rachel didn't answer. We left Yosemite that morning. I never returned. But something followed me. Not a ghost. Not a creature. A memory. For years, I believed the lake had taken something from me. Now I think it gave something back. My childhood. My grief. My anger. The truth about my father. The understanding that losing someone doesn't mean you have to spend the rest of your life trying to undo the loss. Some things are supposed to remain gone. That doesn't make them meaningless. It makes them precious. I still hear children sometimes. Not often. Usually when I'm exhausted. Usually near water. A few months ago, I was staying in a hotel beside a river. Around midnight I heard laughter outside. 3 children. Then a 4th voice. Mine. I almost opened the window. Then I remembered Mirror Lake. I closed the curtains instead. The laughter continued for several minutes. Then it stopped. In the morning, there were small wet footprints outside my door. They led toward the elevator. I didn't follow them. I don't know where they would have gone. I don't want to know. Because I've finally accepted something I couldn't understand when I was younger. There are memories we spend our entire lives trying to recover. And there are memories we survive by forgetting. The difference isn't always obvious. Sometimes remembering gives us peace. Sometimes remembering gives fear a doorway. And sometimes the darkest places in the world aren't dark because something is hiding there. They're dark because they reflect everything we are afraid to see. That is what I think Mirror Lake really is. Not a haunted place. Not a doorway. Not a prison. A mirror. And mirrors don't create monsters. They simply refuse to lie. So if you ever find yourself somewhere in the wilderness after midnight, and you hear children laughing across a perfectly still lake, don't assume they're lost. Don't assume they're ghosts. And don't assume they're waiting for you. Because there is a chance they are waiting for something much more dangerous. Your attention. Your memory. Your regret. And once you give them those things, they may give you exactly what you've been wishing for. The person you lost. The life you never lived. The childhood you barely remember. The version of yourself you thought disappeared forever. And for one beautiful moment, you will believe you have been given a second chance. That's when you should be most afraid. Because the wilderness doesn't need to chase you. It doesn't need claws. It doesn't need teeth. All it needs is one thing humans have always been willing to sacrifice everything for. The chance to go back. And if you ever hear your own childhood voice calling from somewhere beyond the trees, remember what I learned at Mirror Lake. You don't have to answer. You don't have to look. You don't have to know what is waiting in the darkness. Sometimes surviving means accepting that some doors were never meant to be opened. And some memories were never meant to come home. Because the greatest horror isn't discovering that something is waiting for you in the darkness. The greatest horror is realizing that part of you has been waiting for it too. I thought leaving Yosemite would be enough. For almost a year, I believed it was. I moved apartments. I changed jobs. I stopped camping. I stopped hiking. I stopped going anywhere near large bodies of water. I even stopped looking at photographs of mountains. It sounds extreme. It probably was. But after what happened at Mirror Lake, I had learned something about fear that I hadn't understood before. Fear isn't always the feeling that something is about to hurt you. Sometimes fear is knowing something is true and spending every waking hour trying to convince yourself it isn't. For months I lived like that. I went to work. I came home. I ate. I slept badly. I avoided mirrors after midnight. I avoided windows. And whenever I heard children laughing somewhere outside, I turned on every light in the apartment and waited for the sound to disappear. Eventually it did. The laughter became less frequent. Then it stopped. For almost 11 months, I heard nothing. I began to believe I had finally escaped. Then Rachel called me. It was 2:17 in the morning. I almost didn't answer. When I saw her name on my phone, something inside me immediately tightened. I answered. She didn't say hello? She said. He's back. I sat upright. Who? She started crying. Owen. I didn't speak. I found him. Where? Not where you think. I looked toward the window. Outside, the city was completely still. Rachel, where are you? At home. Then what do you mean you found him? I found his name. Where? In a photograph. My stomach tightened. What photograph? There was a long silence. Then she said, From 1957. I remembered the names. The 14 people. The 3 who returned. Rachel. I went back to the archives. Why? Because I couldn't let it go. You promised. I know. What did you find? She breathed shakily. The people who returned. I waited. There weren't 3. My mouth went dry. What? There were 4. She sent me an image. It was an old black and white photograph. 4 people stood outside a ranger station. 3 adults. And 1 boy. The image was badly damaged. But I recognized the boy immediately. Owen. He looked exactly as I remembered him. Same face. Same crooked smile. Same eyes. Except the photograph was dated October 1957. Owen had been born in 1964. I stared at the photograph until my vision blurred. That's impossible. I know. That's not Owen. It is. How do you know? Because I found another photograph. She sent it. Same boy. Different location. Different year. 1968. Then 1979. Then 1991. The same boy. The same face. The same age. Always appearing among people connected to Mirror Lake. I couldn't breathe. How long? What? How long has he been doing this? I don't think he is doing anything. Then what is he? Rachel didn't answer. Finally, she whispered. I think Owen was never a person. I felt anger rise inside me. Don't say that. I'm serious. No. Daniel. No. He never existed outside the lake. I stood up. That's insane. I know. You worked with him. So did you. I remember him. So do I. Then he existed. Rachel was quiet. Then she said, Do you remember anything about his life? I froze. His house? Nothing. His family? Nothing. Where he grew up? Nothing. His birthday? Nothing. I remembered Owen's face. His voice. His habits. The way he held his coffee. The way he walked. But suddenly I realized something horrifying. I remembered him only in the wilderness. I had never seen him outside it. Never received a photograph of him. Never heard him talk about his family. Never known where he lived. Never seen his vehicle. Never known his address. It was as if my memory had built a complete person around a handful of moments. Rachel whispered, "That's what the lake does." "What?" "It fills the empty spaces." I sat down. "What empty spaces?" "The ones inside us." She told me about a man named Dr. Elias Ward. He had been a psychologist who studied wilderness disorientation in the 1970s. Unlike most researchers, he became obsessed with Mirror Lake. He believed the stories weren't supernatural. He thought the lake triggered something psychological. A combination of isolation, reflection, grief, memory distortion, and environmental stress. So he designed an experiment. He brought 6 volunteers to Mirror Lake. They camped there for 7 nights. The first 4 nights were normal. On the 5th, one volunteer claimed she heard her dead mother calling from the water. On the 6th, another saw a childhood friend standing across the lake. On the 7th, all 6 volunteers reported hearing children laughing. Dr. Ward ended the experiment. 5 people left. 1 didn't. His name was Andrew Bell. He disappeared at 1:13 in the morning. Search teams found his sleeping bag beside the lake. His boots were still inside. But there were footprints leading into the water. The footprints belonged to a child. Dr. Ward wrote one final report. Then he disappeared too. His last journal entry contained only one sentence. It wasn't the lake showing them memories. It was the lake learning how to make them. I read that sentence several times. Then I asked Rachel, "Where did you find this?" She said, "At Mirror Lake." My blood went cold. "You went back again?" "Yes." "When?" "Last week." "Rachel, why?" "I found something." "What?" "I found Ward's camp." I closed my eyes. "Is it still there?" "No." "Then what did you find?" "A basement." I opened my eyes. "A basement?" "Under the forest. There are no buildings there." "I know." "What was inside?" She stopped talking. "Rachel?" "I found photographs." "Of what?" "Us." I felt my chest tighten. "What do you mean, us?" "Me." "Okay." "You." "Okay." "Owen." I stopped. "Anyone connected to the lake?" She told me there were hundreds. Some were old. Some were recent. Some were impossible. She found a photograph of herself from childhood. She found one of me at age 7. She found one of Owen from 1957. And she found one of my father. Then she found something else. A photograph dated next month. I asked her what it showed. She wouldn't tell me. "Rachel. I don't want to say it. Tell me. It's you." "Doing what?" "Standing beside the lake." I felt something inside me collapse. "That's not possible." "I know." "Who took it?" "I don't know." "What date?" She gave me the date. 31 days from then. I checked the calendar. It was a Thursday. I remember thinking how ordinary the date looked. That somehow made it worse. I asked her to send me the photograph. She refused. "Why?" "Because I don't want you to see it." "Rachel." "No. I need to." "You don't." "Send it." She hung up. I called again. No answer. I called 23 times. Nothing. At 4 a.m., I drove to her apartment. Her car was gone. The door was unlocked. The apartment was empty. On the kitchen table was a photograph. I knew what it was before I touched it. The date was 31 days away. I turned it over. On the back was a sentence. "Don't let Danya remember." I dropped it. Then I heard laughter. Not from outside. From the hallway. 3 children. Running. I turned toward the doorway. A little boy stood there. 7 years old. Dark hair. Crooked front tooth. Scar above his eyebrow. Me. He smiled. Then he said, "You forgot the beginning." The lights went out. When they came back on, he was gone. But the apartment had changed. The walls were covered in photographs. Hundreds of them. Childhood. Camping trips. Family gatherings. Places I remembered. Places I didn't. And in every photograph, somewhere in the background, there was water. A lake. A river. A puddle. A window. Even a glass of water on a table. Always reflecting something. Always showing someone who wasn't supposed to be there. I walked through the apartment slowly. Every photograph felt like a piece of my life someone else had taken. Then I found one that made me stop. My father. I was sitting on his shoulders. We were standing beside Mirror Lake. But I was not 7. I was 4. The photograph was dated 1992. 3 years before the photograph my mother had shown me. Behind us stood Elizabeth. My aunt. She was holding a little girl. I stared at the child. She looked about 6. I didn't recognize her. Then I saw the writing on the back. Elizabeth, Daniel, and Anna. I felt sick. Anna. The 4th child. The missing name. The one I had never heard before. I searched my memory. Nothing. But suddenly I remembered a sound. A little girl laughing. Not at Mirror Lake. At home. In our kitchen. I remembered running down a hallway. I remembered my father yelling. I remembered a door slamming. Then water. Black water. I fell to my knees. The memories weren't returning gradually. They were breaking through. I remembered Anna. She was my sister. She had died when she was 6. I had spent 30 years believing I was an only child. I had spent 30 years believing my father disappeared after an accident. I had spent 30 years carrying grief for a person I had forgotten existed. And suddenly I understood the lake. It didn't create the children. It preserved what people couldn't bear to remember. I kept searching through the photographs. There were pictures of Anna everywhere. Anna playing with me. Anna sleeping. Anna standing beside my father. Anna at Mirror Lake. Anna smiling. Then I found one photograph that made my hands shake. It showed Anna standing beside the water. She was holding the wooden boat. The same boat. She was looking directly at the camera. Written beneath the photograph were 4 words. She remembers everything. I heard someone behind me. I turned. Rachel was standing in the doorway. She looked exhausted. Her face was wet with tears. You found her. I stared at her. You knew? She nodded. How long? Since the first time we went back. Why didn't you tell me? Because you weren't ready. Ready for what? She looked at the photographs. To remember why your father went back. I wanted to scream. Instead I asked. What happened to Anna? Rachel closed her eyes. She drowned. The room seemed to tilt. When? 1992. I remembered. We had been at a lake. Not Yosemite. A smaller lake near our hometown. Anna had fallen into the water. My father jumped in after her. He saved me. He didn't save her. I had been there. I had watched. Then something happened. My mind had buried it. But the lake remembered. The Mirror Lake wasn't the place where Anna died. It was the place my father went because he couldn't accept that she was gone. He found something there. A reflection. A possibility. A version of Anna who hadn't drowned. And he followed it. But that still didn't explain Owen. Or the photographs. Or the children. Rachel sat down. There is one more thing. What? The people in the photographs aren't all victims. What are they? Some of them are replacements. I stared at her. What does that mean? The lake doesn't just preserve memories. She pointed at Owen's photograph. It creates them. I shook my head. Creates what? People. The word hung in the room. That's impossible. Is it? She pointed toward another photograph. It showed a family standing beside a lake. A father. A mother. 2 children. One of the children was transparent. Not visually. Emotionally. Something about him felt wrong. Like the photograph couldn't decide whether he belonged there. Rachel whispered. Some people come back. Come back from where? They don't know. What happens? They return with memories. Whose memories? Someone else's. I thought about Owen. His missing childhood. His non-existent family. His impossible photographs. His knowledge of the lake. He was a replacement. Rachel nodded. Maybe. Whose? I don't know. Then she showed me another photograph. A man standing beside Mirror Lake. The date was 1976. He looked exactly like Owen. But underneath the photograph was a name. Michael Mercer. My father. I stared at it. Owen hadn't been a replacement. He had been my father. Or something wearing his memories. I felt the room disappear around me. Rachel whispered. Your father didn't disappear in 1995. I couldn't speak. He disappeared in 1976. I looked at her. What? He was already gone when you were born. The photograph in my hand trembled. Then who raised me? Rachel didn't answer. I looked again. At the photographs. At my father. At Owen. At myself. Then I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Every photograph containing Owen also contained Anna. And every photograph containing Anna contained me. The three of us. Always together. Across decades. Across different years. Different ages. Different versions. The same three people. The same lake. The same story repeating itself. Rachel said. Daniel, I think we're not remembering the past. I looked at her. I think we're remembering previous versions. Previous versions of what? Us. The room became silent. Outside, rain began hitting the windows. For several minutes neither of us moved. Then I heard a child laughing. Not outside. Inside the apartment. Rachel looked toward the hallway. I whispered. Don't. The laughter came again. Closer. Then a little girl's voice said. Daniel. My heart stopped. Anna. I knew that voice. I had forgotten it for 30 years. But I knew it. She said. You promised. I stood. Rachel grabbed my arm. Don't go. She needs me. No. She's my sister. That's what it wants you to believe. I looked at Rachel. What if you're wrong? She started crying. What if I'm not? The hallway became dark. At the end of it stood a little girl. Anna. 6 years old. Wet hair. Bare feet. Blue dress. She smiled. Daniel. I couldn't move. She held the wooden boat. Come with me. Rachel pulled me backward. Anna's smile disappeared. She looked sad. Then angry. Then something happened that I still can't explain. Her face changed. For 1 second, she became my father. Then Owen. Then me. Then an old woman I had never seen. Then a child again. The lake wasn't showing me Anna. It was showing me whatever would make me follow. I closed my eyes. You're not my sister. The apartment shook. Anna screamed. Not like a child. Like something enormous. The windows shattered. Every photograph fell from the walls. Rachel grabbed me. We ran. We didn't stop until we were outside. Rain poured over us. The city lights blurred through the storm. And for the first time since Mirror Lake, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Because I finally understood. The lake couldn't force you. It could only tempt you. It couldn't make you remember. It could only make you want to. That distinction mattered. Because as long as I chose not to follow, it had no power. At least, that's what I believed. Until Rachel looked at me. Her face had gone pale. She pointed toward the street. Across the road was a puddle. The rain had filled it. The surface was perfectly still. And in that puddle, I saw Mirror Lake. The mountains. The trees. The children. My father, Anna, Owen, and one more person, Rachel. She was standing beside them. But she wasn't looking at me. She was looking behind herself, at something approaching through the trees. Her reflection raised its hand, then pointed directly at me. Rachel grabbed my shoulder. Daniel! I looked at her. She was staring into the puddle. What? She whispered. I don't think we left. I looked again. The reflection of me was still standing beside the lake. But the real me was standing on the street. The reflection slowly turned its head and smiled. Then it spoke. Without sound. I somehow understood the words. You never left. Rachel began backing away. I couldn't move. The reflection stepped forward. The water rippled. And suddenly the puddle became deep. Far too deep. A tiny wave crossed its surface. Then another. Something beneath it moved. A hand appeared. Small fingers touched the surface. Then another hand. Then another. 3 children began climbing out. But they weren't wet. They weren't dripping. They were dry. Clean. Smiling. And behind them came a 4th figure. An adult. A man. I recognized him immediately. My father. He looked at me. Not angry. Not sad. Almost relieved. He whispered, Now you remember. Then the puddle disappeared. The street returned. The rain continued. The children were gone. But I knew something had changed. Because the next morning, Rachel woke me with a sentence that made everything worse. Daniel! I opened my eyes. She was standing beside the bed, holding a photograph. We need to go back. I sat up. No. She shook her head. This isn't a choice anymore. Why? She turned the photograph toward me. It showed Mirror Lake. Taken at night. 4 children stood near the shore. Behind them were 2 adults. My father. And Rachel. I stared at the photograph. Then I noticed the date. It wasn't next month. It wasn't next week. It was yesterday. Rachel whispered. That's why I called you. I looked at her. What happened yesterday? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned the photograph over. There was writing on the back. 6 words. This time, you both come home. I read it again. Then again. And somewhere far away, I heard children laughing. Not 3. Not 4. Hundreds. And beneath the laughter was another sound. Water. Moving. As if somewhere in the darkness, a lake had just